Hi, welcome to the bathtub. I'm wearing this hat. You hear that crazy bird? Come on, Dodo. Come here. Come. 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 Come here. Come say hi. Come. 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 Come, Dodo. Come. Come on. Come. This is the second time we filmed it. I started this a bit ago. There's a, on the pro software that films this, there's like a beep, beep, beep. And whenever that goes on, Lucky Joe goes ape shit. Dodo goes ape shit. They all think it's time to come out. They were all quiet up until about 5 minutes ago, and then I had to. Lucky, who's still causing us lots of grief, and still goes into these violent fits, wanted to get up in my lap, and of course I didn't want to pick her up because she starts snarling and snapping at me, and then Dodo's screaming and shouting, and so then I had to cut the previous one, and I put this hat on. And we're going to try it again. And you got to listen to the theme song, which is
Super Smash Brothers Melee!
and I hope you could hear that because it's part of our theme show spectacular Battle of the Bathtubs. We call it Battle of the Bathtubs. There's one bathtub, there's another bathtub. These are the two places that you got your books you take into the bathtub that you like to take into the bathtub, and who's the best of the two bathtubs and who's going to win it. And it's going to be a championship bout. And Dodo's up on my back, biting my head. So you're not afraid of it. So she's not afraid of the hat today. I know this is fascinating to everybody at home. So Dodo's now, she's not, normally she's been flying around my head since I put this hat on. Okay. All right, Dodo. And what's the Battle of the Bathtubs? Well, it's between my favorite novel. This is, I would say, my favorite American novel, but I realize it's my favorite novel. Richard Yates' Revolutionary Road. This is the edition I first bought in 1974, 75, when I was living in the Clement section of San Francisco. And it was the paperback that I didn't expect to like it. I bought it because it had, Kurt Vonnegut called it the Great Gatsby of my time. One of the great selling quotes by another writer. And Richard Yates, who I did meet and interview before he died, said that quote really helped him sell his books. Anyway, this is the copy I had. And this is the book we're going to go up against, The Moviegoer. They both came out in 1962. 1962 for these. Walker Percy's The Moviegoer. And I'm going to have a kind of ramble. As usual, I ramble quite a bit. While I'm at it, I've shown this before. This is my first edition of Revolutionary Road with my cool intro. Not my cool intro, my signature by Richard Yates when I interviewed him in 1992. Literally 2 weeks before he died. It says, "For Scott Bradfield, with best wishes for continued success with his own writing and with thanks for a painless interview. Dick Yates, October 12, 1992. And painless because I guess he told me he was very rarely interviewed. He was probably the greatest living writer of that time, and he was very rarely interviewed. And when he was, the interviewers were all assholes. They all treated him like shit. They all basically called him. They treated Yates for his whole life like he was a one-hit wonder. He only wrote one good novel. He wrote one lovely novel, short story after another through his career, and died too young. Anyway, this is not simply a celebration of Richard Yates. It's technically supposed to be a Battle of the Bathtubs. And this is a book, in 1962, which I was just looking this up because you know how well we research these pieces. I literally, within 2 minutes of the dog barking and the bird jumping all over me, I was looking on the web, on the interweb, and I found an article saying that the fact that this book won the National Book Award in 1962 was quite a scandal. I didn't know this. I knew that it was a ripoff, that this book won and this book didn't. There's my dog barking because someone's had the audacity to drive by our house. And it turned out that a lot of other great books were up that year. Listen to this who's who here. Moviegoers. It was Catch-22 was up, and Franny and Zoe by J.D. Salinger. And this book won. And I read this about the same time I read Revolutionary Road, when I was in my late teens, early 20s. And I remember thinking I wasn't that impressed by it. I remember kind of being a little bored by it. I really liked Walker Percy's fourth novel, maybe his fourth novel, called Lancelot. I remember really liking that book. And I read 2 or 3 of the earlier novels by Walker Percy, and I didn't really remember them too vividly, if at all. And I remember being a bit disappointed in this book. However, it beat Revolutionary Road for a best novel in that year. And there's an article, I'm going to put a link to it. I just literally found it 5 minutes ago, talking about how that really was a scandal and there was some sort of fix. They called this. There were some people who say it was a fix was in. I don't know. I don't know what really happened, except that it doesn't live up to this. So anyway, about 2 or 3 weeks ago, the reason I started to do this completely rambling piece is, I'm always looking for books to review and write essays for, and I wanted to reread Walker Percy to see what I thought of him. And this has just come out from, I'll mention this in our New Bopalula in a few minutes when we do another New Bopalula. Walker Percy is coming out in the Library of America. And it includes, Dodo, you okay? My God, it's just it's like a zoo mental institution here. This just came out, and I agree with, I was going to do this for my friends at the New Republic, and Laura Marsh, my great editor there. And I started rereading Percy, which meant I reread. Dodo, could you shut up, please? Come here, shush. Come. Dodo, come. You want to come down. Come. Okay. Come down and shut up. Look at my big belly. Anyway, if I should learn how to edit these things. Anyway, I reread The Moviegoer, and I was pretty bored by it. And then I reread his second novel, which I also read when I was in my late teens, early 20s, called The Last Gentleman. And I have to say, I was so bored by this book, especially the last 100 pages of it, that I kind of started skimming. I just got fed up. And I actually, for one of the rare times in my life, I actually said, I can't review this guy. I can't bear to read Walker Percy anymore. His books are really boring. Anyway, that does not to say he's good or not good. It's just my personal anecdote, pointless anecdotes. Dodo, you can shut up, please. And you can have, look, it's like a little sip of water. Here. A little sip of water. You can have a little water. You want some? Ice water. It's unpixelated. It's unpixelated fresh mountain water, because we don't do any boozing when we do these things. We probably should. And that's a long rambling way of saying I really found the books kind of boring. And I gave up. And I'm almost ready to give up on talking to you guys, but I probably won't. And I'll just read a little passage from The Moviegoer. So the basic premise of this is about a guy. It's 1962, and he lives in New Orleans, and the New Orleans ambiance is sort of well done. And it's about a guy who works for, I think, it's an insurance company. He has a really boring job, and it's kind of a 50s American version of existentialism, where all the characters talk about how life is meaningless and they want to try to find some purpose in life. And this guy spends most of his time in the movies, hence the title. But it really ever talks about the movies. He almost never talks. The character almost never talks about the movies. Every once in a while, he says something like, "Oh, the movie actors are more real than human beings." Okay, nothing really. He doesn't really go anywhere with it. But anyway, he describes a little bit of his search, and it's supposed to be kind of philosophical novel. I just read a little passage from it so you get an idea of how the book starts off. And he says, "I'm on a search. I'm searching for something in my life." And he says, "Really, it is very simple, at least for a fellow like me. So simple that it is easily overlooked. The search is what anyone would undertake if he were not sunk in the everydayness of his own life." So there's the basic premise of the book. And the first 2 novels really is that your daily life is so routine that you don't really experience the reality of life. "This morning, for example, I felt as if I had come to myself on a strange island. And what does such a castaway do? While he pokes around the neighborhood, and he doesn't miss a trick. To become aware of the possibility of the search is to be on to something. So just knowing you need to search to find the reality of your life is the beginning of an important life. Not to be on to something is to be in despair. The movies are on to the search, but they screw it up. The search always ends in despair. They like to show a fellow coming to himself in a strange place, but what does he do? He takes up with a local librarian, sets about proving to the local children what a nice fellow he is, and settles down with a vengeance. In 2 weeks' time, he is so sunk in everydayness that he might just as well be dead. What do you seek? God, you ask with a smile. And Percy was a Catholic and kind of a lapsed, or I don't know, had like all Catholics, a complicated relationship to his church over his life, and it's about somebody who's trying to find meaning outside of the church. I found the book kind of boring. I found this book kind of exasperatingly boring. It's about a young guy whose name is something or other, and he falls in love with a girl by he sees through his telescope, and he gets involved with her family as a result. And the family has one of the sons in the family is dying of cancer, and they hire this guy to be their son's friend, and he sort of hangs around with them, and they want him to take him on a trip in a camper van or something. And for like 200 pages, the central character, he has amnesia, so he often forgets where he is, and he wanders around, and he gets lost, and he forgets what he was going to do. And he was supposed to take this kid on a trip, and then he changed his mind, and the other kid changed his mind, and then one day he wakes up, and the other kid's already gone on the trip. I'll be honest with you, I was so fed up by the time I got to the end of this book, I couldn't bear to read another Walker Percy novel. Anyway, and I even tried to give him a little credit with Lost in the Cosmos, the last self-help book. I read about 10 pages of it. I mean, the premise is okay. The premise is we can learn more about the universe in a day's study than we can about ourselves. Okay, that's not a bad idea. But then it just kind of goes nowhere. So I came out of it. I don't really have much. I would like to reread Lancelot, but I don't know if I will. Finally, I talked a bit about this. I forget what I showed you already. So I have, this is the edition I had as a kid. I bought this book when I was in San Francisco. I was living in the Richmond district, around the corner from my friend Avon Davidson. And there was a little bookshop around the corner, and I found this there, and had a quote on the back, "The Great Gatsby of My Time" by Kurt Vonnegut Jr. And I thought, wow, I want to read The Great Gatsby of My Time. And I picked it up, took it home, and it didn't look like my kind of book. It starts off, it's very, very, it feels like real reality, real daily life in the suburbs, which I didn't want to read about, I didn't think. And it did feel like my family's and my life in many ways. And I couldn't put it down. I've read this book a half dozen times now. I've taught it, used it in classes. We've talked about it on the Bathtub many times. And in 1992, I went and interviewed Richard Yates. And I can't forget, I've done this tape twice now, I think. I got my first edition signed by Richard Yates in 1992. And it's still my favorite book, my all-time favorite book. It's like, I hope I'm not doing deja vu for you guys, but he signed it for me on October 12th, 1992. It says, "For Scott Bradfield, with best wishes for continued success with his own writing, and with thanks for a painless interview, Dick Yates." And painless because he was rarely interviewed in his lifetime. He was totally dismissed as a one-hit wonder. We've talked about this, that this was his only book, and he wrote a lot of crap after that. He never wrote a bad book. He wrote nothing but wonderful novels and short stories. Most of them were shorter, much smaller than this, but they're all wonderful books, and deserved more attention than he got. Anyway, so I interviewed him in 1992. He died 2 weeks later. We've talked about that. There's a few more episodes where I've talked about my time meeting Richard Yates, and I won't say much more than that, except that if here's just a short passage, and this is in the suburbs, and these people are on a search too for a realer life, more real and interesting life for them than they find in their daily routines, the everydayness of their lives, their boring jobs, and their families and so forth. And this is just, there's the Wheelers, and then there's the people next door, the Campbells. And there's just two suburban couples with kids, and they like to think they're more important than everybody else, and they have a better sense of how stupid this post-war suburban world is than everybody else. And here's a little passage. They talks about how their conversations start off lots of anger and fun and comedy, and then they get kind of bored. Even after politics had palled, there'd still been the elusive but endlessly absorbing subject of conformity, or the suburbs, or Madison Avenue, or American society today. Oh, Jesus, Shep might begin. You know this character next door to us, Donaldson, the one that's always out fooling with his power mower and talking about the rat race and the soft cell? Well, listen, did I tell you what he said about his barbecue pit? And there would follow an anecdote of extreme suburban smugness that left them weak with laughter. Oh, I don't believe it, April would insist. Do they really talk that way? And Frank would develop the theme. Frank is the central character. The point is, it wouldn't be so bad if it weren't so typical. It isn't only the Donaldsons. It's the Kramers, too, and the what-do-you-call-it's, the Wingates, and a million others. It's all the idiots I ride with on the train every day. It's a disease. Nobody thinks or feels or cares anymore. Nobody gets excited or believes in anything except their own comfortable little goddamn mediocrity. Millie Campbell would writhe in pleasure. Oh, that's so true. Isn't that true, darling? And Frank is a guy who's going to see the absurdity of all his neighbors, but he can never really find anything in his life that matters enough to him to work for it. Anyway, it's a wonderful novel, beautiful, very funny novel. It's not just depressing; it's very funny, and it's still, it's kind of a, let's face it, I've already telegraphed the conclusion of this. Who wins the Battle of the Bathtubs? Richard Yates, 10 times better than Walker Percy. I don't mean to say bad things about Walker Percy, and I probably should give him another try someday. But I was pretty bored. And I'll put a little link to this article I just found. I don't know how astute or how accurate it is, but it was a year with the National Book Award. Could have gone to Catch-22, Revolutionary Road, or Franny and Zoe. And it didn't go to any of those. Okay, stay safe, happy bathing. More soon.